So, the Guadalajara Zoo, I went there for that conference and I really liked it. They were actually applying to be in the AZA, the certification organization that my zoo and a lot of American zoos, especially a lot of major American zoos, are in. It's not a national accreditation group, it is international. So, obviously, most of them are in the United States and Canada, but you got some zoos in Mexico, you got some zoos in the Caribbean, you got some zoos in Korea and various other places in the Middle East, and I want to say there may have been one in Africa at one point in time. But anyway, Guadalajara would not have been the first Mexican zoo to be in the AZA, but they were going for it. They had already had their inspection at that point, and it felt like they were going to make it just based on what I saw at that zoo. They were really organized when it came to record keeping and stuff like that, which you get from attending the conference. The exhibits look great. I didn't see anything that was like they're going to fail accreditation. And they did pass accreditation, so they're part of the AZA now at this point in time, and very cool. I did speak with a lot of people at the zoo, obviously the entire penguin crew, because I was sorry, I didn't talk with one. There's one guy that didn't speak a whole lot of English, and my Spanish wasn't good enough to talk with him a whole lot. And frankly, he wasn't there as much. He was busy doing a lot of, I think, busy doing a lot of the work on the exhibit while the other guys were translating as part of the conference. But spoke with a lot of them, spoke with the education person, Maria, and his name is escaping me, but I did speak a little bit with the zoo director. I kind of got the heads up from the one of the translators who was very fluent in English about like what the proper greeting would be in Spanish, or proper thank you would be in Spanish for like attending the conference or stuff like that. So, and this conversation would kind of be like a lot of what happened in Mexico, where you go up to someone and you start speaking in Spanish, and they're like, "Ah, cool. The guy from the U.S. can speak Spanish, is willing to speak Spanish, is willing to try," and then he answers you in completely fluent English, and you go, "Ah, okay, cool." And then, like, you talk about why you know a little bit of Spanish and where you're from, and then it's a good conversation icebreaker to actually be able to like speak some Spanish and like you know meet in the middle when it comes to like what you could do and what you could say, and whatever. So I can't remember the name of the zoo director at this point in time, but he said that they do a lot of the conferences and education stuff to try to like just improve their staffing as much as possible. It seemed like hiring really, really capable and intelligent and good people was like something that he wanted to do as a zoo director. He talked a lot about like educating zoo goers on like what like how a zoo works and being like transparent and stuff like that. It's funny. One of the exhibits I liked at the zoo that I thought was cool was, and I can't remember the name of what they call us, but it was essentially like it was the vet building and the commissary, and it was like public facing. So there were all these like windows in that the public could watch and see what you're doing. And there's like shades and stuff they could draw down if something was really like a touch and go medical procedure or something like that. And I thought that was cool. He talked about, being able to look in the commissary is a very easy way to teach zoo goers that, what the animals are eating is human grade food and it's high quality and all these other things. Like you can see it right there. Like it's not dog food or something. It's just like, all the produce is there. Everything's produced in a way that people can see, which I thought was cool. But that building, I think, it wasn't asimilar to what the Omaha Zoo, I think, recently did with their veterinary building, that there's like publicly, I don't know if it's private or public, it seems like it's publicly viewable vet rooms. So I was like, oh yeah, that Omaha did something that the zoo in Guadalajara already did. The zoo. So there were a few things I noticed different between like typical American zoo, typical zoo in the United States, and Guadalajara in Mexico. I don't want to say that they're like behind the times when it comes to like where American zoos are at, but there's certain things I saw there that harken back to a different time in U.S. zoo construction and zoo exhibit design. Not necessarily like the exhibits were worse, It's that, like, say the penguin exhibit is a perfect example of this. They have an Antarctic penguin exhibit, not a subantarctic penguin exhibit. They have an Antarctic penguin exhibit that's cold enough to allow for um, the holding and the holding of Adelie penguins. Like, there's only two zoos in the United States that do this right now. It's SeaWorld San Diego and SeaWorld Orlando. No one else really has it cold enough to have Adelies and emperors. A lot of them are subantarctic. So, like, say in St. Louis or Indianapolis or Chattanooga or the Shedd Aquarium, Pittsburgh, whatever, Cincinnati. All these places are cold enough exhibits to have kings and gentoos and kings and gentoos and rockhoppers and macaronis and whatever, like all of these subantarctic penguins. About 45 degrees or so, not as cold. So this zoo in Guadalajara had that exhibit, obviously, and that was, perfectly normal Antarctic penguin exhibit. It was a little bit smaller than the ones in SeaWorld, but I don't think necessarily needs to hold 300 birds, right? So on the outside of that exhibit was a lot less like decor or immersion stuff that you might find at a zoo in the United States. Like if you go in the penguin exhibit in St. Louis, there's a lot of rock work and stuff that's only for you, right? Like obviously the penguins have their part of the exhibit, but as you're going through these places, like there's stuff that's there just for the guest and for the guest experience and the guest immersion and stuff like that, what guests expect to find. That penguin exhibit on the public side, essentially this feels like a big like warehouse or like freezer or whatever. Like it doesn't have a whole lot of extraneous bullshit on the wall. There's like a little ice thing you can stick your hand in and like make stuff. There's a couple signs. It's not decked out in nearly as much theming, I guess you could say. It doesn't resemble an amusement park as much as a lot of modern American zoos do with some of their new exhibit designs. So I suppose the money that you would spend on the exhibit is going a higher percentage towards the actual animal husbandry aspect of it and the actual functionality of it than necessarily like the decor. Or, when I worked in New Jersey, they're renovating the hippo exhibit, and one of the key things that they wanted to do was kind of like a little like laser thing, a little projector display thing, and like that's an attraction. It's not necessarily anything for animal husbandry. It actually eliminated the ability of birds to be in the area because they didn't want them shitting in the expensive projectors. So that was money that they did other stuff too. Like they updated the filtration capability of the hippo pool, which was important. But it's not like the animals gave a shit about the projector, right? Like that money was for the humans. That money wasn't for the animals. So I saw a lot of stuff at that zoo that was like concentrating on the animal side of things more than like the human. Like I would appreciate if this building looked like X, Y, or Z, So that was a difference. And obviously they got accredited. Those differences didn't matter, right? It was the animal husbandry stuff that was important. It was the vet stuff that was important. It was the record keeping that was important. The foliage was great everywhere, right? Like, I'm going to guess a lot of those are more native plants, but from a botanical side, the zoo was beautiful. There was a whole bunch of plants everywhere that just looked great. From the aesthetic side, there was a lot of things that were like kind of more keeping with like authentic Mexican building design for some things. There was like an arena that reminded me of what may have been like an old school arena in Mexico, or there was a couple courtyards where there were the snack stands, and in each one there was like something I called the water coffin, I guess you could say. It was like a big fountain that was like a block pool kind of thing that like turned into a forever pool. I imagine that has maybe some significance in Mexican culture. I'm not sure what it was, but each of those little courtyards was kind of a neat thing to have, rather than like, it was more interesting to me than like a snack stand at a zoo that might be in the U.S., especially some of the older ones where it was like, whatever, you want a hot dog or what? Like, move along. So I guess I appreciated the theming when it came to that, but it wasn't like it wasn't like it was like, it's not like they spent $10 million on the theming of the snack stand, right? One big difference was amount of animals, really. In each particular exhibit, there was just more. Like you go down the line and you're like, okay, this is a large, reasonably sized parrot exhibit it wasn't a corn crib. Like in the United States, corn crib style exhibits are I don't know if controversial is the word, but they're on the outs, right? They're not acceptable exhibit design at this point in the larger certification process. So, I mean, this corn crib may have been 30 feet tall and like very wide. So, now the thing about the corn crib is that there was a reason why it was in vogue at a certain period of time because it allowed you to contain an animal and have plenty of points where you could connect perching or a bed or whatever. And the shelter up top made it so that they weren't constantly rained on and everything like that. Like the corn crib is out of style because it looks quote unquote bad, but it was functionally a thing to do for years and years and years. So their corn crib style exhibits were like 2 or 3 times as big as the things that I might be thinking of. So, but in that reasonably sized exhibit, you might have 10 parrots. In a reasonably sized exhibit, you might have a bunch of monkeys or whatever. And it wasn't like an unheard of amount. And again, they're accredited by AZA, so those were not a problem to the accreditation committee. In the African area where they had a bunch of like free range animals or whatever, it wasn't totally free range, but it was kind of a safari style, right? A lot of animals there. You just felt like there was more animals per exhibit than certainly at my zoo, and then probably in a lot of zoos at this point in time. That was the thing. Still AZA accredited. There was a lot less merchandising push. And I don't know if that's a consequence of being in Mexico, where there's probably not people with a bunch of money to like buy their kids 7 different gifts or whatever, but I feel like somebody was talking about how I feel like somebody from there was talking about how, because we wanted to go to the gift shops and find stuff, was talking about how it would be like, I don't know, like it was too much to see the gift shop or whatever, like it was too much crap to be sold. And I would be going through these gift shops that, there was at least one that was maybe like smaller than this room I'm in right now. And I feel like the zookeepers in Guadalajara would just be like blown away at the sheer audacity of the average like big city zoo in the US and their gift shop, and just the sheer amount of stuff they're willing to sell you because it's a lot. Like I keep going back to the St. Louis Zoo's gift shop. I don't even think that one's a bad one or like a bad example, but it's like it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. You could get very expensive things. You can get magnets. You can get plushies. You can get all this stuff, right? And it is not unreasonable by U.S. terms, but it would just like blow everything out of the water of like what gift shop options and selections were at this zoo in Guadalajara. And I think there's something to that where like obviously it's a revenue source which can go into doing other things. But like it says something that the American zoo just has so much bullshit to sell you compared to the zoo in Mexico. One other big thing I noticed with the zoo in Guadalajara is that it's in Mexico, right? So not only do you have the botany of everything, but also there's just like 6-foot iguanas running around because they're wild, right? So there was one climbing around above a Mexican crocodile exhibit, I believe is what they were called. And you're just like, oh, don't fall in there, don't fall in there. And they're just running around all over the place. Now, keep in mind, 6-foot iguana has a pretty big ass tail. Like you don't want to mess with that iguana. Like it was definitely different. I didn't get a chance to see all the zoo. We were kind of like roaming around on lunch breaks, which are fairly extended by U.S. terms. But was kind of roaming around on lunch breaks. But exhibits I liked included the aquarium complex. I want to say that part of the zoo was an extra ticket, I think. Maybe that area with the aquarium and the penguin exhibit. Obviously, the penguin exhibit was why I was there. You've seen Adelie penguins. Um, I guess that wouldn't be the first time I've seen Adelie penguins, but it is only probably the second time. They were cool. Apparently more chill than I would have thought. Uh, another thing that happened in that penguin exhibit is they did have public-facing uh, baby room, right? So when the penguins are growing up, they need a certain point in between when they're hatching and when they're with the parents that you're teaching them how to be a penguin in human care, right? So they had that in the baby room, which was very modular in that they could divide it up a whole bunch of different ways with screens, or with like plexiglass, which is very intelligent in case you have one that's way older than others. I thought that was cool. But guests could see that. Guests could see the incubator room. Guests where I think diets were also prepped sometimes, I want to say, depending on what time of year it was. Don't quote me on that. There was the clutching room, and then obviously the exhibit itself, and guests got to see all those things. There was a lot of transparency of that zoo, just in general, in its exhibit design that I think North America or zoos in the United States could take a lesson from. Like the aquarium area, they didn't really have a whole lot of sharks at the time. I don't know if they were having issues with the tank, but they had a bunch of touch pools, which is cool. Maybe not the most well marked. What was able to touch and what was not. There was, I know, at least one time we were asking the lady out there that was in their guest services department. I was like, "Can I touch these?" And she was like, "Oh no, no took our." I was like, "Oh, sorry. You can touch that one, but not this one." Anyway, what else was there? The safari area was cool. We went on a we ran out of time, so went on like the ski lift thing. That was a cool way to see a whole bunch of stuff. So it's a newer zoo, and some of their exhibits definitely came from a time where they'd be a little outdated if they were built that way in the United States. But it's also a later zoo in that they don't have a time where like they built a reptile house with reptile exhibits that are like this big, right? Like their reptile area was like the average size was like round and pretty big. So you could tell the time period of when it was built in that regard. That's probably all I have about to say about the Guadalajara Zoo. If you're in Guadalajara, it's definitely a recommend. And it is one of the zoos in Mexico that's AZA accredited. So proud of them for doing that. They seem like they're doing a really good job. So that's what I got to say about that.